Welcome to the Planning Commission meeting for September 9th. And we will start tonight's agenda by a Pledge of Allegiance. If I could have her please stand, please. Repeat the Pledge of Allegiance after me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. First on tonight's agenda will be the approval for minutes of August 5th. If there's any members of the committee that has questions or concerns about that, if you would make that known. If not, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes for August 5th.
I read through them and saw a couple of things we might want to look at as far as changes.
Okay.
On page 1, line number 14, this is the citizens present. That should read Clyde L. Hicken and Bonnie B. Hicken. They've spelled those names wrong.
Okay.
And then for zone, they've got ZOE, and that is all over. And so it's just picked up that word and used it. And then the one that concerned me the most was on page number 4. The first line, 137, it says, Dave Anderson stated at this time the applicant has proposed to expand the footprint. And that should read has proposed not to expand the footprint. I think that was the only thing that I saw.
Okay. I was not in attendance, so will you just verify that in attendance? Let's see. Who's present? I was not in attendance for this one.
Absent.
Oh, absent. There you go.
What about Jens? Was he not?
Yeah, he's not listed.
He's not listed on either.
I'll add him.
Okay. I think he was there.
He was here.
Yeah, in fact, I do remember. That's right. So.
All right. Any other comments or questions? And we can entertain a motion with those changes.
I'd make a motion that we approve the minutes from August 5th with the corrections made by Commissioner Wilkinson.
I'll second that motion.
I have a motion and a second. Any opposed? All right, we'll move right ahead to the first item on our agenda, which is for the zone change amendment. It is a public hearing for the Davis Estate zone change. We'll go ahead and hear from staff.
I want to make this sounding more difficult than it maybe needs to be. The proposal simply is to change zoning. A lot of times when we talk about zone changes, there's an accompanying development proposal, preliminary plat is usually what you're looking at. We don't have that in this case. We do simply have a long-time property owner that is proposing to change the zoning of this property right here. This is Mill Road across from Old Mill Estates and Academy Park, the Mulestein subdivision right there. Proposing to change the zoning from rural residential to R115. R115 is what properties that are being developed on the east side of Mill Road were assigned before those developments started. And R115 is consistent with the low-density residential general plan designation that properties in this area have. Typically, staff recommends that we don't change zoning until we have a development proposal that's seemingly ready to go. This, I think, is a little different situation from our perspective where, again, it's a property owner that wants to change the zoning. They view that as really the first step to at least conceptually getting to a position to where they want to start potentially developing. They've given us a concept plan. This is actually the subject property right here. And we've been working with an adjoining property owner on different ways in which their property conceivably could be developed. So we have looked to make sure that just from a feasibility standpoint, what the property owner here wants to do could work. And I think in light of that, staff feels comfortable recommending that the zoning be changed to R115, even though we don't have a preliminary plat accompanying the request at this time.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Anderson? No? Okay, thank you. At this time, if there's no questions for staff, I would like to open the zone change for public hearing in reference to the Davis Estate zone change. Have a motion to open that?
Make a motion.
I have a motion to open for zone change, or excuse me, for public hearing. I'm all over the words today. And have a second?
Second.
Have a second. At this time, public hearing is open for zone change discussion. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to discuss the zone change request for the Davis Estates as illustrated on the screen? Let the record note that there is nobody here to address the commission. And at this time, I will make a motion to close the public hearing in reference to zone change amendment for the Davis Estate. And coming back to the commission, is there any questions among the group here? Anybody have concerns?
Mr. Anderson, what's the general plan designation for this?
Low density residential. Okay.
So it fits just fine.
It's,
Thank you. Go ahead, Brad.
Okay. Commissioner, I'd like to make a motion that we accept the zone change for the Davis Estate.
Have a motion to accept the zone change for the Davis Estate. Do I have a second?
second.
We have a second. We'll do a roll call vote, starting with Jens.
So I've seen this a little bit before I arrived. Is that okay to still vote yes? Vote aye? Okay, aye.
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 Thank you. We'll go ahead and move right along to the next item on our agenda, which is the Title 15 text amendment.
There are three different, I guess, areas of the code that we're proposing. We make modifications to tonight. I'm going to go through these fairly fast, so if I miss something or if you have any questions, please stop me or ask when I get down. We're proposing that we make a pretty minor change to our roof pitch requirement for accessory buildings that are a certain height, taller than 15 feet. Actually, the change is on the next page. If you can move down for us, Corey, right here. Right now, we require a 412 roof pitch. That's proven to be problematic for people that want to build garages that they can park tall vehicles, like recreational RV vehicles in. And given that situation, we've reviewed the concept of changing that 412 roof pitch requirement to 212. And that's something that we as staff don't have any concerns with. So that's the first proposed change. That's the one that has to do with accessory buildings, changing the roof pitch requirement. That is the minimum roof pitch that's required from 412 to 212. The next change, the way we have included in this memo, is the big one. This is really big. Right now, Spanish Fork is among the few cities that doesn't require people to landscape their yards. We've talked off and on for years about whether it was time to impose a basic requirement to require landscaping, and the direction that I received recently was to get that ball rolling. So tonight we present this proposal, which does a few different things. It defines xeriscaping, which we think, when done the right way, is a very appropriate way to landscape property. We've proposed to strike the landscaping requirement from the master plan development section of the ordinance, because with other changes, it would then simply be required everywhere, making that somewhat unnecessary. Then we've proposed this program here with these four main points by way of how landscaping would be required. First of all, Landscaping would be required in the front yard within 1 year of us issuing a certificate of occupancy for a new home. You'd have to landscape the side and backyards within 2 years of us issuing a certificate of occupancy. We spell out what qualifies as landscaping. That's point number 2. We clarify that all of a property needs to be landscaped. Today we talked a little bit about what, for example, a garden might mean. Just to be clear, you know, an area that's set aside and improved for a garden, that qualifies, we think, under these provisions as being landscaped. Lastly, you know, one of the concerns that we always have is policing. So what do we do when somebody doesn't follow the rules? And one thing that happens now when somebody builds a new home is they provide a deposit to the city. It's a $1,500 deposit. And that deposit is kept by the city until the house is built and we've inspected it. And should we find upon doing a final inspection of the house that, for example, somebody has broken a sidewalk or chipped up a curb really badly, maybe broken a water meter, has somehow damaged some of the public improvements around that property, then conceivably we take that deposit money and make those fixes. What we've decided we think is best in the case of landscaping simply is to increase that deposit, or maybe to $2,500, and to keep that not only until we've inspected and found that all of the adjacent public improvements are fine, but also to keep that until the landscaping's installed. So somebody would have the 2 years to complete the landscaping in the backyard, that'd be for the back and the front. And upon completion of the landscaping, they'd be given that deposit back. Today, we do something similar to that with master plan development, so somebody can move into their house, for example, in the winter, when it doesn't make any sense to landscape a yard. We require them to post a bond, which typically is a $5,000 bond. Just write us out a check for $5,000. We keep those funds, and when the landscaping's done, we cut a check back to them for that amount of money, and that's a guarantee of sorts. It's worked fairly well for us to give people an incentive to get things landscaped. So with this, we've talked about a similar program. It's not identical, but same kind of monetary incentive that'd be kept by the city to encourage people to get landscaping done.
So is the deposit cash, or can it be a bond?
In this case, I should not say bond because we're talking about cash,
Okay.
which is what it is with the existing deposit that we require. It's cash.
I have a few questions for you
Okay.
that I've written down while you were. So first one I have is there's always been a debate, I guess, or discussion about who owns the parking strip between the sidewalk and the street. So is that part of this discussion?
In our view, that's not debatable. That is owned by the city, clearly. If it's between the sidewalk and the curb, that's owned by the city. Now, another section of our ordinance does require adjoining property owners to maintain that. So we would look to them to improve that as part of this program, as part of the front yard.
Do you want that defined in here?
We can.
I think that it's gonna cause issues if you don't. Somebody's gonna landscape up to the sidewalk and then say that the area between the sidewalk and the street is not my issue, it's yours, so.
I think it's easy to add. I would just add under front yard, under .1, including the park strip.
Well, it does say actually, and park strips.
Do we have that already?
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. I've read this 3 times and
I
you
do
picked it
too,
up,
so.
so I'm, okay, never mind, strike that, thank you.
Yeah, I think that we have it there, then it's covered, right?
So this is new lots moving forward, so there's nothing that in this ordinance change that is gonna go after existing use the word go after, that's a bad term, but that it's going to apply to existing lots or existing facilities.
Right, and we talked a lot about how maybe to have this apply to existing lots, which frankly, we have parts of the city where, in my opinion, it's a real problem. If I were a neighbor in some of those neighborhoods, I'd have some concerns.
I would entertain a motion, or maybe the motion to add verbiage that says 1 year for existing, but maybe we as a group, and maybe the city council can approve it, we can recommend, but I think there should be discussions that maybe we say that there's a new ordinance in the city that from this point, once it's approved, that we give 5 years for people who are existing to come compliant. So 1 year for new and 5 years for existent or something. So that's basically saying that in 5 years from now, we won't have any of these issues.
People get put on notice, so to speak, today, you're saying?
You have 5 years to do it. So
Can you legally do that with existing?
We can, and what we've thought, Brad, is best. Title 15 deals with development, new construction. So where we're not talking about necessarily new construction, we do have a section of the ordinance that's dedicated to nuisances. That's found in Title 8. So we think language that would apply to existing properties and their need to meet this kind of a landscaping requirement probably is a better fit.
I'm just making a note here. So 5 years existing to be compliant with Title 8.
And have that language added to Title 8, I think would be the best approach to take.
That still
Is
goes to the
this-
planning commission?
Not necessarily. It could. I mean, if you guys are interested in that, we certainly have no reason not to.
Is this proposal synonymous with what other cities are doing?
It's very similar to what in my experience even has worked fairly well in other communities. The concept of giving somebody a full year to get a front yard installed, I think accomplishes two things. It gives people a reasonable amount of time to get it done, and it gets it done soon enough that as neighborhoods are built, generally landscaping gets installed at kind of the same time. So you don't have somebody that's doing it on one lot in 2015 and somebody else that's waiting, you know, with a home that was built about the same time, 4 or 5 years to get it done, which I think just lends to a more harmonious environment for a lot of different perspectives. 2 years to get a backyard done, likewise, giving people an ample amount of time to get it done, but making sure that landscaping simply is done in kind of a systematic way throughout a neighborhood.
And then item number 2, where you're discussing more of a definitions, you have xeriscape improvements, but I don't really see xeriscape defined. If
Go up
I'm,
to definitions.
where
That's the
Definition.
addition that we propose to make up there, is clarifying what that is. I agree, we need to define that because people have pretty broad understandings as to what that phrase means. I think frankly it gets misused a lot.
One question I would have in that is that xeriscape doesn't necessarily mean it has to be native. So I'm wondering if that should be climate appropriate or native vegetation instead of and. I know it's.
well, native would
splitting
open up
hairs.
the weeds, they're native.
Well, but what I'm suggesting is that there are plant materials that are climate appropriate, but it may not be native to this
So
area.
how could we?
I think that's really the
So how could we
intent.
word, so that's a great comment, but how could we word that to prevent weeds, I guess?
Not including noxious weeds, and noxious weeds are defined. You know, you got Ag Extension Service and other groups that have done that.
Come in my yard, you can see what a noxious.
Any other discussions for Mr. Anderson from the team here?
I had a question, Mr. Anderson, so you got 1 year to do the front yard, 2 years to do the backyard, but then you have a 2-year buffer before you lose your deposit. Am I reading that correctly?
Right.
So, in essence, they have 4 years to do their.
They have 4 years, but within that 2 years, they may face criminal penalties. So they could get citations, they could get just whatever comes with violating
Ordinances.
these kind of, it could probably be like a Class C misdemeanor.
Does that need to be spelled out in terms of what the potentials are?
That's spelled out elsewhere in Title 15, just what violations of this chapter mean. 4 years, frankly, that's kind of an arbitrary number that we came up with. And again, the concept is we want to provide encouragement. This is really about encouraging people. And also, we don't want to hold people's money forever. That becomes a problem for us over time. So we wanted to make sure that there's some kind of a sunset out there.
Is there that for the current bonding or fee that you currently?
No, and if we were to continue on that process, we would suggest that we add one. That has become problematic.
Is it an appropriate place when we're discussing landscaping? I know there's other areas that it is discussed, but when I think of landscaping, I think of adding to or beautifying an area, right? But how do we word that things left in your front yard broken down over time detracts from what we're trying to accomplish?
That's Title 8, so that's where we define what nuisances are: inoperable, unregistered vehicles, debris, refuse.
That's already in there.
It's in there, but we is
Don't enforce it.
police chief, myself, city attorney, city administration, we all feel like we need to revisit that language to, clarify exactly what we're hoping to cover. And the intent is exactly what you described. It's to make neighborhoods beautiful.
Yeah.
To provide a certain amount of assurance for property owners that their neighbor's not going to do something that's going to adversely impact their property value.
Yep.
That's something we've really struggled with and hope to improve.
Well, this looks good, making the, accomplish what you're trying to do there. It's probably long overdue,
Is there any,
some areas.
I just have one question. The Xeriscape. So if there are people who feel like they don't have any real landscaping on their property, this definition, well, let me just ask it this way. If someone doesn't really have much of a lawn and they don't water it too much, but they kind of keep things mowed down and cut, are they going to have trouble with meeting this Xeriscape standard, or do they have to have some pretty visible things done on the yard? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think generally, if you're talking about lawn, like any kind of turf grass, that's not xeriscaping. I mean, just not watering grass
is okay.
Doesn't make it xeriscape. But at the same time,
Good to know.
if you have plant matter that's growing and you keep it cut to a height of less than 6 inches and do some things like that, so you don't have dirt, then that becomes a lot more gray, and that might qualify. I say gray, you're getting more into the gray area
Yeah.
between what does and doesn't.
Well, what I'm really
qualify.
saying is, one might look at Xeriscape as an absence of landscaping
Got it.
of their property. And,
maybe we just need to add in the definition, it is not an absence of landscape.
yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying. For those that are listening, they want to know that they don't need to go out and make a lot of changes to their yard, maybe only tidy things up and keep things cut, weeds and so forth, and they'll be okay? Or do you think they would be in violation of this?
Well, for anybody that's watching today and that's worried about their existing yard, if they keep it clean and they keep it cut, I don't think they'll ever violate or be in violation of what we have in
Okay.
Title 8, as part of the nuisance code.
So for new permits is
The rules probably would be a little bit different.
yeah, okay. Gotcha.
I think it's important to know that people that are watching too, just that the idea is not to get people to spend money. We know that there's tough times out there, but in general, we want to make sure that our city is set up for success and beautiful, and we want to impose an ordinance that keeps that in mind.
But I really believe that property owners, they buy houses, every expectation and intention of having their home add to the value of the neighborhood, of having a beautiful yard and taking care of it and different things like that. We understand that sometimes that takes time, and that's why we're talking in terms of years and not months, by way of what we think is appropriate to allow. At the same time, we know that not everybody has the same expectation about what is appropriate and beautiful, and we think it is necessary to have a baseline so that everybody can count on some level of improvement in their neighborhoods.
Just among the team here, you guys would entertain a motion to add the 5-year clause to existing? Or do you think it's something we should make a motion without that and have further discussion down the road?
Well, it sounds like it doesn't apply to this necessarily.
Yeah.
That'd be more a direction for staff when we modify Title VIII.
You don't feel we
Think it'd
could
be a
just
good
add it to this?
suggestion.
I almost feel we could add it to
I
this
think it'd be a good
without
suggestion.
doing
What
Title
he's saying
VIII.
is that this applies to new development, whereas the Title VIII applies to existing. Is that correct?
That's, yeah.
Is it? Okay.
Conceptually, I think it's a good idea. I mean,
Yeah, I think it's, rather than let it, let's say this gets approved and we deal with the new construction, let's also deal with the problems that brought this up in the first place.
right.
So that would probably be a good recommendation to staff is, after this gets approved, work on Title VIII to have something mirror that.
Which is underway. We've started
Okay.
that. And that suggestion, that's definitely something that, whether you direct us to or not, we'll discuss. I think that's a good idea.
I'm assuming vacant lots have similar issues. I mean, you see, there's a vacant lot in my neighborhood that is immaculately pristine. You'd never realize it was vacant because there's not a weed growing on it.
Really.
But then there's others, of course,
Yeah.
that are.
It's probably the exception, unfortunately. Yeah, that would be a nuisance issue there.
So if we can add that, please, to the agenda down the road then, please, to review Title VIII.
Okay, got it.
And add the discussion about how do we, I guess, use the word police up existing lots. And we discuss time frame and maybe even to Bruce's point, empty lots as well.
Okay.
So if we can put that as a future agenda, please, and that the staff would review. Coming back to this one here, is there any further discussions before we open this up to a public hearing?
Got one more area to cover. I can do it quickly.
Okay.
And this can also be my report about action that the city council's taken on your recommendations. You recommended that the trust plant property, so Kirby Lane, Old Wingers over there, last month you recommended that zoning be changed from industrial to commercial 2, which is what the applicant requested. The city council approved a zone change there, but instead of commercial 2, they approved shopping center. And they did that for a premeditated reason. They are somewhat concerned about having non-retail uses developed at key locations in the city that we think would support retail uses, and that was one that came to mind. So in order to make sure that these sites are developing, again, with retail uses, that would be, sites that have great access, visibility, traffic patterns, the characteristics that retailers need to survive. We are proposing to amend the shopping center zone to, for the most part, eliminate professional office uses. There would be a couple of exceptions, and I'll use an example that I've used a couple of different times now. You can picture Macy's and Big 5 Sports. In between those two, there's a chiropractor office. We think there still is a place for that. And if it's a diminutive part of a bigger development, if they're not taking up a lot of square footage, maybe they're using a space that, for whatever reason, just can't be leased to a retailer, we don't necessarily think we need to eliminate that entirely. So the way this is worded now, simply offices are eliminated as permitted uses in the shopping center zone, but they still would be allowed as uses subject to conditions, and the condition simply would be that you couldn't occupy a space that's larger than 3,000 square feet with any office use. That would be medical, I think maybe like a real estate office, attorney's office, anything along those lines, uses that are defined now as office. And we wouldn't want to see more than 5% of a shopping center occupied with office uses. So for example, Canyon Creek, we're talking about maybe as much as 1.2 million square feet of square footage. So their 60,000 square feet in all could still be occupied by office uses. So we think this, frankly, is a fair approach to take with the people that have shopping centers in town today, with the developers of Canyon Creek and some other projects that are in the works. And that it does ultimately what our shopping center district is intended to do, which is to be a retail district. So that's the other change that we're proposing to make there.
Does any of the members of the commission feel 3,000 is too much? That's pretty, I think that's pretty high for what we're trying to achieve. I mean, you talk about, for instance, you look at the buildings that are in the Cow Ranch parking lot, Subway, FedEx office, the AT&T, those I bet you are only 2,200 to 2,600 apiece. 3,000 is still pretty big. That chiropractor I bet you is only 2,000 even.
I think so.
It's only 2,000. I think 3,000. If we're trying to make some leeway and allow some stuff to maybe intertwine there, 3,000 is a pretty good sized space still.
Well, one thought there is if you give that option, then there may be a good professional office type business that needs to come in there that needs that space. And really, if you're the developer, you'll maximize your uses, and there would be an economic reason, for example, to say, hey, let's not have one great big one. Let's have a couple smaller ones here. But I mean, I guess what I'm saying is I don't really have a whole lot of heartburn over the 3,000. As you know, the 5% of the overall is what holds you back from getting too much. So you may have one large one or maybe a couple smaller ones or something. But
Well,
I think that if you're looking at it from a developer standpoint, I would agree with you, because a developer, they don't really care what's there. They sell a space, they sell a space. I think this idea is to protect our tax base. One of the reasons is protect our tax base. And if we have a retail spot full of office space, then we are losing our tax revenue coming in. We'd rather have things that are producing tax base to our city. From a developer standpoint, you don't care. A sell is a sell is a sell.
highest bidder, right? I mean, that's
Highest bidder,
obviously
they don't care what goes in
what would
there.
drive.
So that's the idea here, is we're trying to protect our tax base.
How does the change to 5 acres impact that? I mean, how big is the Cow Ranch example that you gave? If that was developed, I don't know how big that is in property size.
That's probably less than 5 acres, and that's already, the Cow Ranch site, that is part of a development that's larger than 5 acres. I think it's probably larger than 15 with Macy's and everything across the street as well. AmSource owns that whole center, and we would view that as a shopping center. In fact, I think a good part of that is already zoned shopping center. So it would come into play there. The change to 5 acres.
I would guess, just to give you an idea of what 3,000 is, I would guess 3,000 is probably the size of Zub's, if you've been in Zub's. Because it's the end.
Yes, you're right.
It's the end piece there. The inside pieces are probably about 2,500 a piece.
The size of which?
Zub's.
Zub's.
That's probably about 3,000. Maybe a tad more, 34.
So Dave, am I reading this correctly? No one office space can be more than 3,000, but overall, whether you have one or multiple, they can't exceed 5%. I mean, is that?
Right, so we're trying to address the concern from the two different perspectives, because we wouldn't necessarily in the Canyon Creek development want to see the truss plant site
Sure.
developed with 60,000 square feet of
Office space.
right there. Now, to disperse that 60,000 square feet throughout the development, then we don't necessarily feel like that is having a dramatic impact on taking away from what the chairman described, which that is the issue. It is
Yeah.
protecting our
It's a
our tax
policy
base.
decision, you know, to have revenues. I mean, that's what keeps the city going. Taxable, you know,
It's a big part of it, yeah.
So throughout other parts of our city, Main Street, and, you know, that commercial retail development areas scattered is plenty of office space. What is the zoning for office space?
So today, professional office uses are allowed in, want to make sure I have this completely right, in every non-residential zone that we have.
So this is really the only one that,
So this would be the only one. So we'd be looking at key locations. Yeah,
so that's consistent with the policy, because you're not worried about this factor in other places.
much less concerned. Yeah, I mean, we're very jealous about protecting what we're talking about here, properties that could support retail activity. But there are hundreds and thousands of acres even in the city where today you could have a professional office use, and we recognize that's an important part of the community, and they're great additions to the community.
So you've striked car wash out, number 13. Lube center, tire center, still there. Just wondering about some thought process on that.
So we may change that if we understand that car washes generate sales tax.
Okay?
So it's been my understanding that they don't.
Okay.
As a service, they don't generate sales tax. If they do, then we'd look at them like a tire center or a lube center,
Okay.
which still are generating that kind of revenue. So I appreciate you noting that. That's something that between now and when that goes to the city council, you know, we might have a different thought on.
Mm-hmm.
And the issue simply is, does it generate the specific revenue that
Sales
we're
tax.
looking to protect? Yeah.
Yeah. And then outdoor display, what is an outdoor display? What would be an example of that? The reason that you've
Put a garden shop or something like that at Kmart or Walmart. Or
okay,
Exactly. So Shopco, where they set up their garden center every summer out in a parking lot. We don't necessarily think that's a bad thing.
mm-hmm,
So we've simply moved that to a use subject to conditions.
okay,
So there we clarify that, hey, you're welcome to do that. You simply can't impede traffic, you know, whether it's pedestrian or vehicular traffic, you've got to maintain it so it looks nice,
okay,
and some different things like that.
okay.
So does that change the ability of someone like a fireworks store or the way that it's reading now, it almost sounds like it would limit, you know, or a Christmas tree, just those types of things in this zone. Because it it says it has to have a permitted facility, permanent facility in the center.
I think those uses, Christmas tree sales, fireworks, different things like that, they probably fit into a different category, and maybe with some exceptions, where the people that operate the fireworks stands, they simply have the permission of, let's say, Macy's to be in their parking lot. But here we're talking about Macy's having an outdoor center in their parking lot. And, you know, that's where the phrase, the permanent facility is intended to tie back into that. We call those itinerant merchants. They have a different kind of licensing process that we go through and different rules. So that's the third area.
I don't know that I have any problem with the 3,000 square feet either.
I was going to ask you, I mean, we've talked about all different kinds of sites that you've worked on professionally here, chiropractor offices and different things like that. I'm trying to think of, for example, Tim Shanto's business that is on Main Street. He converted a house, and I want to say that's not more than a 1,500 square
Yeah, I was
foot
gonna say, yeah.
home. Same with a dentist office next to Beto's or Filiberto's that was constructed here a year or two ago. I don't think that's any more than 2,000 square feet. So we're probably on the really lenient side with 3,000. I don't know if that will prove to be a problem or not, but
Probably about 12 of the facilities that I run are less than
Smaller.
3,000.
Is this, let's just say something currently existed in that area that we're defining as shopping center, that was over that amount, would it impact them?
yep, they'd be vested.
All right, any other questions from the team? No? Okay, thank you, Mr. Anderson. This time I would entertain a motion to open the condition, or excuse me, the Title 15 amendment for a public hearing.
I'll make the motion that we open, did you want to do it? That we open this up for a public hearing.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Did you get that, Kim? It's like 3 people that said yes. I don't know which one you typed out.
Commissioner Robinson said it the loudest, so that's what I had.
All right, good, good. At this time, I'd like to invite I will open the public hearing and invite the public to come up in reference to anything discussed in the last 10, 15 minutes in reference to Title 15 amendment. Go ahead. If you'll state your name, please.
Tate Colton.
Hello.
Hi. I just have a couple questions in reference to the landscaping additions. You stated that the parking strip was city property, not the owner of the adjacent properties area, right? So would the city or the property owner be liable for the initial landscaping of that area?
The property owner.
Okay. Thank you. I was just wondering about that.
Okay, good question. Anybody else who would like to address the commission? Okay. At this time, I will make a motion to close the public hearing for Title 15 text amendment.
Second.
I have a second by Commissioner Nelson. And I would entertain a further discussion, a motion.
I'll make a motion.
Go for it.
I'll make a motion that we, are we approving or just
Recommending.
recommending? Recommending? Okay, so I'll make a motion that we recommend that the changes to Title 15 be approved concerning landscaping and shopping center zone.
Second.
You don't want to add the noxious weeds? Just kidding.
Should I add that we made the suggestion? Or does that go?
I noted that. So
Okay.
I took that as marching orders.
Okay. All right, good. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
I have a second. And let's do a roll call vote by Commissioner Wilkinson.
Aye.
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 Okay. Thank you. We will now go to item 3 on our agenda tonight, which is the conditional use permit. Again, it is a public hearing, and this is for the applicant Vivint Wireless. So, Mr. Anderson, if you'll get us up to speed on this.
There used to be a substation that the city owned and operated on the corner of 1100 East and Canyon Road. You guys remember that? Picture where that was?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's an existing cell tower. It was sort
All
of
gone
adjacent
now.
to that.
All cleared out.
It is, yeah. That's the site that we're talking about tonight. Again, it's an existing tower, and the proposal is like other proposals that you've seen quite a few times in recent years, simply to add equipment to the existing tower. Vivint's, it's a new operator here in town. We haven't worked with them before, but the equipment that they'd be installing is similar to what you've seen from, trying to think of who spent the most, Verizon's done the most work, it seems like, Sprint. AT&T as well. Nothing out of the ordinary. That's what I'm taking a long time to say. Again, when it comes to these facilities, the city's taken the position that we prefer co-location on existing towers to having, for example, a newcomer to the community like Vivint go and build a new tower, just simply because we feel like that has less impact on the community as a whole. So staff's recommended that the proposed conditional use be approved.
Any questions from the team for the staff? I think we've been through enough of these cell phone discussions that we will zip through them. So at this time, I'll entertain a motion to reopen public hearing in reference to conditional use for Vivint Wireless.
So moved.
I have a motion.
I'll second it.
I have a second. At this time, I'd like to open public hearing and invite anybody in the public that is here to discuss cell tower. Everybody's giving me blank stares. Let the record note that there is nobody from the public to address the commission for conditional use of Vivint Wireless applicant. And at this time, I would entertain a motion or further discussion from the team.
I'll make a motion that we approve the conditional use permit for the Vivint Wireless location.
I second it.
Have a motion and a second and a roll call vote starting with Commissioner Nelson.
Aye.
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 I will move to the next conditional use discussion, which is for the accessory apartment on 600 East.
Thank you. The address is 160 North 600 East. And I'm just going to touch on a couple of things really quickly, kind of like with the cell tower. You've heard this before. So this is more for the benefit of anybody that is maybe new to the idea of accessory apartments and exactly what they are. First of all, accessory apartments aren't duplexes. Accessory apartments are secondary dwelling units that have to be located within the primary structure on a residential property, within a house. A separate dwelling unit, but it has to be within a house. That is to say, you can't have an accessory apartment in Spanish Fork in a detached garage or something like that. Typically, these end up being basement apartments. But the biggest difference between an accessory apartment and a duplex is that the property owner has to reside on premise. For a lot of reasons, most cities have found that that ends up being a good thing for neighborhoods versus what sometimes you end up dealing with duplexes or other properties that are just occupied by renters. In order to qualify for an accessory apartment in Spanish Fork, your property has to meet certain criteria. I'll just simply say this property meets those criteria, provided that the applicant provide one garage space for each of the 2 units. There is a 2-car garage on premise. They also have to provide 2 other off-street parking spaces on premise, which they have. The only other gotcha that sometimes surprises people is changes to the power system of the structure. We do require a separate power meter for each of the 2 dwelling units then. In accessory apartments, that can be a little bit expensive. But for a lot of reasons, we've taken a pretty firm position as the city that is required. So staff, again, has reviewed this and found that the property qualifies for approval with the accessory apartment. And we've simply suggested that 3 conditions be considered with approving this, if that's what you choose to do as the land use authority on this. And the big one is just condition 3, like I mentioned, just to make sure the applicant's aware that they do need to separate the electrical between the 2 units and have a separate meter.
Any questions for staff?
There's really no, is there a history of any parking issues really with this place? I noticed there was all this discussion about the parking and the stalls and stuff like that.
think you're ahead of us.
I was gonna say
think
this,
so.
I was looking at the
Because
beehive.
no, I'm not aware of
Okay.
any issues that we've ever had with this one.
Gotcha.
As far as the, did I understand right, the owner has to reside in the home?
Correct.
Is that correct? I
Yeah.
couldn't see
On
that in any.
premise is how I'd put it. I mean, it doesn't matter which unit they live in.
Is that in some other detail? Because I didn't see it in the.
It's in Title 15.
Okay.
In fact, we clarified that this past year.
Okay.
I was shocked to find in this meeting that, geez, we've never defined that, so we
Yeah.
did that.
Okay,
But as a term of art, accessory apartment, typically, it implies that there is an owner residing on premise. That's usually how most cities use that phrase.
Wasn't there a provision that said that dual meters weren't necessary if it was a family? Something like that? It seems like when we had the discussion that if it was family,
You know, we don't.
dual meters did
Yeah,
have.
by ordinance, we don't require the 2 meters. So what we're doing here is we're suggesting that that be a specific condition of approval.
For the
Now, I will
condition.
say that I think there are some building code things that come into play with the 2 meters. And just to describe what our biggest concern is, it's people not paying their power bills. And sadly enough, there does come a certain point to where we shut off power for lack of payment. And when it's 1 meter for 2 dwellings, that really creates situations that we hate. So that's one of the bigger reasons.
so currently it's not required, but you're suggesting it here.
It's been customary for us to require it, but our ordinance doesn't specify that you have to do it. So
Okay.
for example, if it was a family situation and somebody came in and, you know, requested maybe that they not be required to do a separate meter for that reason, you'd have the discretion to not require that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, your explanation could go much further in a lot of ways, and I think it's gonna be hard to require 2 meters. You got the same thing with Questar Gas. You're sharing a furnace in a lot of these homes, and so there's all sorts of problems with separating power, gas, heating source, water. So it sounds like it's not required in the ordinance to have separate meters, is that correct?
That's correct,
Okay.
yeah.
But you're just suggesting it here.
It has been required as part of the conditional use approval, customarily, is I guess the best way I can put it.
Okay.
And you're right, there are other utilities that present the same problem.
Yeah.
Power, I think, is just the one that we have the biggest headaches with, really. And we don't,
Because you're providing.
we're not Questar, right? So we're not the ones that have to deal with the practical headaches of
Yeah.
that situation. It's not fun, you know.
Yeah,
Or, you know, we've had other issues related to it. One tenant complaining about being charged, you know, more than they should be. Just had numerous things that this has helped avoid.
all right.
Okay. Any other questions for staff? Okay. Is the applicant here tonight? Are you the applicant? Is there anything you'd like to address to the commission? Okay. Okay. At this time, it is a public hearing, so I'd entertain a motion to reopen public hearing to address concerns with accessory apartments.
I move that we open.
I have a motion by Commissioner Wilkinson,
I'll second.
Commissioner Tagg. At this time, I make a motion, or not a motion, at this time I will open public hearing to discuss any concerns from the public in reference to the accessory apartment. Let the meeting notes reference that there is nobody to address this tonight. And I will make a motion to close the public hearing in reference to accessory apartments.
Second.
Any further discussion from the commission team?
I don't have the attachment won't pull up I just wonder if you could just read what the conditions were that the development
You bet.
committee recommended.
Becky's gonna pull that up.
I'll let you read them up there. They're quite lengthy, actually. So there's only 3 things that they discussed for conditions, but there's quite a few.
Boilerplate
Definitions, I guess, of the accessory apartments that you want to read. I'm sorry, what'd you say?
Just in their boilerplate conditions that are automatically required through Title 15, and then they added these 3 conditions, that they meet those as well.
I'd like to ask, I know the applicant says, I don't want to talk up there. But, no, you're all right, as long as you talk loud, okay? Can you tell me about the parking situation for the facility? I mean, if you're 2-car garage and you're bringing in, and so.
Two-car garage on one side, and then there's the driveway's been cut on the other side, and there's gravel.
So do you anticipate people parking on the street?
No, there's 4 spots.
Okay.
2 for me and 2 for them. Off-street.
Good.
Do you have a concern over the conditions, the 3 conditions?
No.
Okay.
I don't know what they are exactly. It just said meet current standards.
Well, probably the big,
That home's a little old, so I don't know. I've been told a few things, like there needs to be a 2-hour firewall between up and down. But that's about all I know about, other than the electrics.
Conditions to us, though.
so not to them,
So you can choose not to do those conditions.
the applicant.
So the discussion is about the conditions, so I just refer, so DRC makes approvals with their conditions, and then we can choose to make those, accept those conditions, add to them, or subtract them as we recommend them to city council.
Well, you're the land use authority, so you're
Yes,
deciding
yes, thank you.
what the conditions are.
Does that make sense, or are you still
Yeah,
clarifying?
well, so you understand that you gotta install 2 power meters, and it's possible, you don't see a problem with that? Okay. That's probably the biggest one that I can see on there, but really, I mean, that could be a challenge, and I don't know that I'm that much in favor of it, to be honest with you, just because I think the way it's being used, there's a lot of other issues that are very similar.
I have checked into some of them, like the meter for gas, because I didn't know what they were going to tell me. It's like $300 to hook another meter for gas in. That would be a big one for me.
Yeah.
Tear all sorts of stuff out of it.
Do you have 2 furnaces?
There is a fireplace, gas fireplace in the basement, so they can control there, but my furnace is.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Any questions? I don't know that I'm in favor of the 2 meters personally, but, I mean, it's a condition that you guys, if we feel that it's necessary.
Power department's pretty adamant that they have 2 meters.
The electric department has made it clear that.
Yeah.
Wow,
I don't necessarily like being their spokesperson, but at the same time, I feel like I'd be shortchanging them if I didn't say, they seem to feel very strongly about it. And I typically we defer to whatever the power department wants,
I'd
with
like,
some regularity.
But I think in
That's-
general, though, some people who have this situation might not charge separately. It might be
part of the rent.
utilities included.
You know, and I
And so
think,
for you to say additional meter and then they say utilities included, that's a waste.
I assume our people would be happy to talk about those situations and deal with them practically as they come up.
What would you, the team here think about some type of wording that we change for the conditions, it says that if the contract for the additional applicant does not include utilities, that a second meter is installed, instead of just a blanket statement. So they can choose.
Always change.
Hard to enforce.
I was gonna, yeah.
Part
That's
of the
what?
fear,
Hard to enforce, I would
Yeah.
think.
It would be.
part of the fear or the struggles the utilities have had is,
show you the contract.
let's say it is included in it and the landlord does not pay it.
Yeah.
And
Because
I
he's
don't
not-
have experience of how much.
That's true with any.
The tenant is coming saying, I need my power back on.
Yeah.
And we can't do that.
Yeah.
And that's what the electric department has expressed. I don't know how many cases or how often this happens.
But that's true with any
I
dwelling.
think we could talk to them.
Anybody could not pay the bill. I think
Where it's,
But if you don't pay the bill, it's your house and it impacts you. That's the
What-
difference.
the-
That's where-
the feeling I have is that if it's an accessory apartment, it's all in the family. And it's not like it's a duplex with two different people. And so if the power bill isn't paid, then the whole family's involved, with that power bill not being paid, as opposed to, well, hey, I don't like those guys anyway, so I don't care if you turn their power off,
Let
I'll
'em
turn mine
freeze.
type of a deal, but.
I don't know what the exact number is, but I suspect that most accessory apartments, though, probably are occupied by non-family members in the community.
Yeah, I know they are. Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
So-
I assume that that's probably the case. So what you're saying is, this is a way to, we're not going to police that, so in the event that it does get separated, you don't want, the power company doesn't want to deal with the problems. I'm just thinking of how difficult it is to separate the meter. It's not just putting the meter, all the circuitry in the house has to be changed to make sure that the downstairs circuitry is on one meter and the upstairs circuitry is on another. So another panel probably would have to be added and circuits would have to be rerouted, and that would be a lot more than the $300 you're talking about for the gas change. If you had to go a gas meter, that would be huge. But anyway,
What do you know about electricity anyway?
not much.
No, that's a good point. It'll be very pricey.
Yeah.
And I think the other point is, most homes are gonna share a common furnace. They're not gonna have a second furnace for the basement, and so,
Honestly, I don't think meets building code requirements. I think you have to have separate
second
HVAC.
system.
Yeah,
Really, it's part of
each dwelling unit.
Title 15 or something?
No, that's building code. So that's gonna come into play regardless of how our ordinance reads or what conditions we impose or anything like that.
I see.
People will have to meet that
Okay.
building code requirement.
Well, that would solve that problem then.
Yeah,
Because if you only had one furnace and you separated the power, you could still end up with
same issue.
an occupant that didn't have heat because the power was turned off upstairs.
Right.
So that solves that.
I note that these are the same conditions that the city is putting on other accessory apartments, and so it's kind of a standard. And for them to vary from that is going to pose some challenges for the city if they pick and choose who gets to have 2 meters and who gets to have 1. And so
Just as a thought, I feel like we had a really good discussion with Dale Robinson in a work session a couple of months ago. I'd love to have somebody from our power department come and maybe talk about this issue just so you can hear it from them.
Yeah.
I've never had a really detailed discussion about what all the reasons are, for them requiring the separated power. So that'd be enlightening for me as well. We can just get their thoughts.
does this body have the power to say we're not going to impose that condition, or does our recommendation is without that condition?
I think you could approve this without that condition, and the only way then the applicants would be required to do it is if that still is required by the building code. I'm not sure if it is or not. I think we wanted to, a lot of times we spell out things in conditions that are redundant, just to make sure everybody understands that, like we did with the first condition, that the applicant meet the criteria that are already in Title 15, right? That's completely redundant. I don't know if it's that way with that power condition or not, but.
We made a comment a minute ago, somebody made it, that that'd be a hard thing to enforce. Well, we make decisions every day that aren't enforced.
Yes, that's true.
I mean, I've sat here for 6 years almost. We've talked about chicken coops to everything else. They're not enforced either. So, I mean, yes, we want to make things that make sense, things are doing, but if we really want to get down to it, it's hard to enforce a lot of things. So we want to do things that are in the best interest of the community, best interest of the city, and hope that people make the right decisions. And I don't have a problem with the conditions. I just feel that I wish there was a way, and maybe one of you fancy wordsmithers can, if that's a word, wordsmithers, we'll clone that, right? But if there's a way of wording that we can protect the city, but also not invade on some of the silliness. I mean, if somebody's has family members in the downstairs, or I don't know, that
Well, and,
some weird stuff like that.
All honesty, if it's immediate family, even if they have it partitioned off as a separate dwelling unit, we typically wouldn't say you have to have an accessory apartment conditional use approval from the city to use your home that way. So I think we might handle that in an altogether different way.
I could see that. Okay. I don't know, maybe making a mountain out of molehills. Anybody else have concern? Maybe I'm the only one up here that's concerned about it.
Just a comment, I think homeowner and city and tenant almost always, maybe not always, but almost always will be glad in the long run that they have 2 meters.
Probably protects the landowner too.
Yeah, I just think the upfront cost and everything is not fun, or it's a a hurdle you have to jump. But in the long run, I think everyone's better off if you do require this, and it's only by experience we've come to this conclusion, if I'm not mistaken. Just some regularity to the situation and consistency. You don't want one person getting approval that's got to have it and one that doesn't. So I understand what you're saying, Brad. I think there's nothing wrong at all with what you're saying. I just lean a little bit more to the side of just let's make it consistent and do it.
Yeah, good.
I'm easily persuaded. I mean, I'm okay with the way it's written too, especially if the homeowner is okay.
Yeah.
I think it's good discussions we're having, and I think that's why we have a team up here to try and work through and discuss some of these. Is there anybody that would like to make a motion in reference to the conditional use for the accessory apartment on 600 East?
I would move that we make that recommendation to allow are we approving this? So, yeah, I would move that we approve the accessory apartment on 600 East with the conditions that have been imposed by the city.
Okay.
I'll second that.
We have a motion by Commissioner Wilkins, a second by Commissioner Fallon. Roll call vote, starting with Commissioner Nelson.
Aye.
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 All right. We will move right ahead to the next subject. Item C of our conditional use is the Beehive Home Condition Use Permit.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. The subject property is located on First South at about 850 East. There. The proposal is pretty straightforward. This is a footprint and floor plan of the structure as it sits today. Faces north, so this is the public street, First South. There's a garage and a total of 12 beds. A lot of times we talk about beds, which I think generally is a term that's used interchangeably with residents, but that's not automatically the case. So they're approved today to have a total of 12 residents, as I would interpret it, in the facility. Like I said, the proposal is pretty straightforward. They'd like to add on to the existing structure by building this to the south, do some remodeling under the existing roof, change the floor plan, and convert the garage to dwelling space as well. As we've looked at this as staff, we don't have any concerns with the proposal and the expansion, except that we've struggled to figure out how they possibly can meet the city's parking requirements. For nursing homes and this type of a use, It appears as though they need 7.2 parking spaces, given how our ordinance reads. The DRC looked at that and seemed to believe that somehow you could fit 7 cars on site. And just to be clear, I don't think that's the case. I really don't. Practically speaking, I don't see anyone using 3 parking spaces here. And I don't believe that practically you could fit 3 other spaces in front of the garage here to make that work. Also, that, in my view, doesn't need to be the end of the world, but just to be clear, I don't think that's going to happen. I think rather than to park in that kind of a fashion, you'd simply have people parking on the street, which is legal. People can park on the street. But generally, we do require a certain amount of off-street parking, and that's where we've struggled. So that's a hurdle that I'm not entirely certain how best to get over. Maybe to suggest one perspective that you could take in looking at this expansion, which is a conditional use. So as a conditional use, you can impose conditions like we've talked about on the last use that was discussed. Relative to the facility as it stands today with 11 beds, I don't think they meet the current parking requirement for 11 beds. We generally don't take this perspective, but I think you probably could take the perspective without going through any costly challenge to simply say, well, we're deficient today. Would 2 beds make it that much worse? And you answer that, however you'd care to. But again, no concerns with the expansion other than parking. One thing that I think is important that I want to be clear about, I think uses like this can cohabitate with other residential uses in neighborhoods like this very well. But I think the outside appearance becomes very important to make sure that they're good neighbors. So relative to parking, one thing that I would not support is more hardscape, more parking on site. I think that probably does more harm than good. So.
Okay, thank you.
So now that we're caught up here to where I was,
Exactly.
there's as far as I could tell, there wasn't really a history of complaints or problems with the parking. It's just we're just talking about meeting the written text right now with this.
Yeah. So to answer that question now, I'm not aware of any complaints
Okay.
that the city's ever received about parking here.
This is a long-standing place, right, that we've had here.
I think it was built in the 90s.
So not very long ago for those of us that are.
Thank you. I'm guessing somebody's here to talk to us about this, because nobody's come to talk to us from the other. So wait one moment, and let me go ahead and open it up. So we have a motion here to open the public hearing.
So moved.
So moved. So we have a motion by Commissioner Nelson,
Second.
second by whoever said that. I didn't even hear it. And so at this time, I will open the public hearing to discuss the Beehive Home conditional permit. So if the public would like to come speak to us about the conditional use. Hello, how are you?
I'm Shirlene Brown. I live right next door on the west.
Okay.
I have a 6-rod by 6-rod yard.
Okay.
They have a 3-rod by 8-rod yard.
Okay.
They have no parking. They have been very good neighbors. But I don't want a warehouse right next to me that's longer than my yard is. I don't have any yard or any frontage on that side now, but they are good neighbors. But they have no parking. They don't need to be added on anymore because there's no place for them to go. They can't even put a parking place in the backyard. But if there's anything they should do is find a way to park the cars in the back instead of out in the street, because sometimes we can't even get in and out of our driveways. I've got a double driveway, I've got an extra driveway, and sometimes you have a hard time getting out of them. And you've got to decide, their garbage cans come over on the front of our yard. It's a public street. Yes, I agree with you. But they've got to have facilities to do what they're supposed to have, not use the neighbors. Thank you.
What was your name again?
Shirlene Brown.
Thank you so much.
Charlene, is this you right here, up on the screen there?
I am. I'm right west of him.
Right here.
Yes.
So your yard goes back to,
I have a 6-rod by 6-rod, and they've got a 3-rod frontage and an 8-rod.
so my math's not very
Back.
good. A rod is what, 16.5 feet?
It is.
Okay.
So it's kind of square and the other one's rectangular.
Oh, I see. Okay. So this isn't you here.
No, that isn't me.
You could rent some space right there if you parking.
If it wasn't somebody else's backyard and they wasn't using it for their kids, it'd be all right, wouldn't it?
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to address the commission? Hello, sir.
Hi, my name's Merrill McHale. I live across the street on 835.
Okay.
I have 2 nice driveways, and I enjoy the home. I really do. I take a lot of stuff over there out of my garden, but they do not have the parking. I seen a little old lady that had to park a half a block away and then walk up there. There's quite a bit of traffic on the road. A woman came over to visit me one day, 2 years ago. I walked her back and we just about got hit. The way people drive and the parking is my only thing against it, because they're very good neighbors. But I think they ought to have better parking.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there anybody else that would like to address us tonight?
I'm the applicant.
You're the applicant?
So as you said, this home has been in existence for quite some time. I am a new owner that have come into the property. I feel terrible for Miss Brown and the sir there. I had no idea there were complaints. They've never been brought to the attention of the existing administrators because they told me there was never any complaints about the parking. I want to just make mention, in the conditional use ordinance, there are no parking requirements in assisted living. So in the ordinance, there are no parking requirements in the ordinance unless you have more than 15 rooms. And so I've purposely stayed under that. I didn't want to overwhelm the parking or the neighborhood. And so as it stands, there's really no ordinance requiring me to have a certain number of parking permits written in the ordinance today.
But that's what a conditional use is. I can make a condition to anything.
Sure. I understand that. Just want to make note of that.
I mean, you're just saying that the conditional use doesn't say for over 15, but I can make a conditional use to be anything.
Okay. I wasn't aware that the ordinances worked that way, but when I initially had met with the DRC that approved this unanimously, we talked about that RV spot being used as tandem parking. At one point, it was brought up to leave the garage as is without framing it in and allowing an overflow of parking in that garage space. And the point was brought up to, if you're going to allow tandem parking in the garage area, why not allow that tandem parking on the RV space? Is the way the concrete is poured and laid out per city code of width and length, there is enough for 6 comfortable spaces there.
When you say there, are you referring to 6 spaces right here?
No, the whole thing.
Okay.
So the whole driveway and additionally with the RV space.
I agree with that.
I believe that the
6 would be pretty tight, though.
Well, it's fairly comfortable if you do the square footage.
I mean, you're talking 3 right here and then 3 across. Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
and I foresee, I foresee two, this is the way the condition was laid out by the DRC, is to pass it with a condition that I tandem park my employees right here, thereby leaving this open to residents, families. My residents don't have any cars. I don't drive. I believe that this space, prior to me taking ownership, has not been utilized as a parking space. A notice needs to go to families. Of course, staff will abide by that. The heaviest day is Sunday when families come to visit their loved ones. Other than that, it's a sporadic visitation, and it's not very overwhelmed with parking spaces throughout the week. Sunday is our heaviest day there when family, and there is some on-street parking, and the driveway is filled up on those days. My full staff at its highest point is 2. So I would really just need 2 spaces to accommodate my staff in that RV space, thereby opening up the rest of the driveway for visitors. I'll just make one more comment that I'm trying to keep up with this elder generation that's coming in and trying to make a cleaner, newer, safer environment. I'm putting full sprinklers in. As you can see by my plan, there are full bathrooms, as opposed to now some of those rooms just have half baths. So I'm just trying to just create a safer space, and which is, you know, going to cost some money, and I'm just trying to offset that, which will take many, many years, by just picking up an extra room by doing that, and overall just trying to create an environment that this aged population would appreciate.
Thank you. So one of the things that is challenging about this application is that it's not the bed owners that are causing the issue, it's the visitors. The bed owners don't even drive. And, you know, and I went over and did a site visit, and you know, probably 90% of the time it's okay. It's that 10% that when people are all over the roads, up and down the streets, clogging other areas. It's hard for me to understand if 2 additional beds are really going to cause additional parking issues. Because it's not the people staying there that are causing the issue. It's the visitors coming that are going to cause the issues, right? So I think really to me the argument or the challenge is for this, I forgot your name, sir.
Sorry, can I state that? Dennis McGraw.
Dennis, so Mr. McGraw here to manage it a way that the people coming to stay are respectful of your property and respectful, and things are coming out, and maybe even there's a way that they can manage the visitors, that, you know, instead of having a house full at 2 in the afternoon, maybe you can say, you know, visitors every 2-hour increments or something. Maybe you can manage it in a way that you can minimize the impact on your neighbors.
I appreciate that being brought to my attention, because it allows me to do something about it.
I won't address the garbage cans because that's a totally different issue, but it is still something that needs to be addressed. So, and I think that the owner here has heard that, and I think that you can make that's an easy fix, right, Mr. McGraw? So, does anybody have any, I mean, they're asking for 2 extra beds. The 2 extra beds is going to cause a little bit more visitation. We've already decided that they're already not compliant, really, according to.
We need to close the public hearing.
Not really. I guess I could, unless somebody else comes up. But thanks for the reminder. But I don't know. Does anybody else have discussions?
Well, this is a lot like many of the items that come here. If you didn't make any changes whatsoever, you would have some of the same problems that have been brought to our attention. And there's, you know, every new thing that's done, there's potential for some, you know, some additional safety concerns maybe, or some additional impact. And my view of it is just that the change won't add any problems. The problems that are there are there and have been for years, and hopefully with the, you know, the new manager, there are things that can be done to minimize, you know, some of the things that are causing concerns. I just don't really feel that there's a good reason not to approve what's being asked. And what I'm and I appreciate what you're saying. What I'm saying is, if we didn't make any changes, the circumstances would be the same, and we can't go back and undo what's already in place now, if that makes sense. In other words, if we do nothing, you're still going to have the same concerns you have now. Does that make sense?
Mr. Anderson, can you help me walk through something that I'm working through in my mind? And that's the applicant's question about the conditional use parking versus, you know, usually parking's in its own separate section of Title 15 and it applies citywide whether there's a conditional use permit required on it or not. Am I understanding that correctly? So I guess what I'm trying to work through in my mind is if this were a brand new facility, but regardless of whether, you know, the existing stuff, it wouldn't be approved probably because of the parking is lacking.
Without a doubt. And you're right. We have parking requirements for every use, every land use in the city. In addition to our basic parking requirements, we don't have hard copies for you guys to look at anymore, but pages 103 and 104 of Title 15, we have those spelled out in a chart, which covers every land use in the city in one way or another. Now, in addition to that, in sections of the code where we talk about conditional uses, sometimes we have more stringent parking requirements, which is the case with assisted living facilities. And specifically there, we talk about assisted living facilities with more than 15 beds. And as the applicant pointed out, that requirement doesn't apply because of the number of beds that they're proposing to have. So instead of that, the requirement is what we find in the basic chart, which is one space for each employee. During the highest shift, he's told us, and we take at face value, that that's 2 employees. That'd be the most that they have on site at any given time, plus 0.4 spaces per unit. In this case, that's per bed, and that's how we calculate the parking that's required. So back to your point, for a new facility, they would either provide that much parking or we couldn't approve it.
So the likelihood is when this was originally approved, the parking standard was different.
I sure hope that's the case.
And right. And that at this point would be considered an existing non-conforming use as far as parking is concerned.
Right.
So you're saying that with the ordinances that stand now, that it isn't in compliance, and with the addition of the 2 beds, it would put it further out of compliance?
I wouldn't put it quite that way. I think I know what you mean, but just to be clear, today they're legal, but we would consider them to be legal non-conforming versus not in compliance, which for a city, they do mean 2 different things. So they're legal non-conforming today, and I guess that's just the distinction that I make is.
Okay.
You know, we talk about, as we've reviewed things through the years, about why we have a general plan. And if we have a general plan, we should follow it. We have it for a reason. I guess I feel the same way about these requirements, that we have them for a reason, and yeah, maybe it's not significantly greater of an impact, but those standards are there for a reason. And so to me, I just don't see the need to approve something that doesn't meet the standards that are outlined. So.
And you know, another option here, of course, is to talk about changing the standard. I don't know how to go about best doing that. This is a use that I don't have a lot of experience with. Certainly other cities, you know, would have some insight that we could probably glean talking to neighbors, different things like that, that could be helpful.
I'm Shirlene Brown. I live right next door on the west.
Okay?
I have a 6-rod by 6-rod yard.
Okay?
They have a 3-rod by 8-rod yard.
Okay?
They have no parking. They have been very good neighbors. But I don't want a warehouse right next to me that's longer than my yard is. I don't have any yard or any frontage on that side now, but they are good neighbors. But they have no parking. They don't need to be added on anymore because there's no place for them to go. They can't even put a parking place in the backyard. But if there's anything they should do is find a way to park the cars in the back instead of out in the street, because sometimes we can't even get in and out of our driveways. I've got a double driveway, I've got an extra driveway, and sometimes you have a hard time getting out of them. And you've got to decide, their garbage cans come over on the front of our yard. It's a public street. Yes, I agree with you.
We discussed when we had a work meeting that maybe we add a provision for parking that for areas that the formula for creating how many parking spaces are different when a facility has non-drivers in it. So for instance.
But that should have been, I mean, the way that number was calculated should likely have that same kind of conversation. And so there was a standard established at some point that took that into consideration. You know, I'm involved in a project in Provo City that's not assisted living, but it's a senior housing facility, and you're required to have 1 parking stall per unit plus half a stall for each as a guest. And so that's a different standard because, like you said, but even then, as a senior care facility, a senior housing complex, they have the same thing. They don't have drivers as much either. And so it's less than it would be if it were just a standard parking complex or an apartment complex. And so I think if you look at the numbers that are outlined there, it seems to me that it makes sense to be to take all that into consideration, how many drivers you would normally have.
So is this something that we can hold off on making a decision and look at what would be appropriate parking for that space? I mean, I don't know. I think if we have laws and rules that we want to enforce, then to accept a proposed change and not make it conforming, I just don't feel like that's the best plan for us to set a standard to do. Change the plan then. You know, let's look at it. Yeah, let's change the rules then.
With the proposal.
But I would rather look at the rules then and make the change and then approve this. Because I do think the home is a great place. I've been there many times.
It is a great place.
Yeah.
Changing the rules isn't going to help the neighbors, though, is it?
How many spaces short is it if you were approving today?
For 13 beds, they would need 7 spaces.
And they have how many?
I think practically speaking, they have 3 off-street.
They would be normally required to have 7 off-street?
We're talking about off-street parking that'd be required. And incidentally, this is the first time that I've heard that any of the neighbors have concerns about parking. This is the first time I've heard it from neighbors. Aside from that, I personally think our parking requirements for a use like this probably are something that we should revisit. You know, regardless of what happens tonight, this is something we should look at in some more detail and try to make sure that our standards are where we want them to be. I think it's important to remember that having too much parking sometimes is just as detrimental to neighborhoods as having too little. So, you know, we don't want to overshoot there either.
Before we continue the discussion, let me interject for just a minute and close the public hearing. So if there's nobody left to address us.
I
driveways for the people in his apartment, so that he's got adequate parking. But when it comes to more beds, they don't have to have adequate parking, the same? I mean, you're expecting more for his people that's gonna be moving into one little resident than you're expecting for the other fellow to have for all of his facilities.
Okay, thank you for the comment. They're not different, though. All I asked of him is, did he anticipate people parking on the street, and did he have room for people parking? Those are permanent versus guests, and there's also different parking requirements for different situations. Can I help you, sir?
My name's Dennis Toland.
Hello, sir.
I own the franchise for Beehive Homes. I was here the night that this was approved, and it was in '95 when we built the home then. We have 50 homes in Utah now. This was our original style, and we've graduated from then. We currently have 2 of these very same renovations going on in the state of Utah, one in Logan and one in Loa. We have a home in Loa that does very well. We've had 11 of these older homes do this very same renovation, all of them. It really depends on what they ask for parking. I typically see a 4-to-1. It's 1 stall for every 4 residents because they don't drive. I couldn't hear you very well where I was in the back, and I apologize. Is it 3 for 1 that you were talking about
I
here?
think it's 4.2, wasn't it? For the
It's
formula?
0.4.
0.4.
0.4 per
More
bed.
than 2-1. That we require.
So it's a little less than a half per bed.
Yeah, a little bit.
That's more stringent than most of the cities we've worked with. So that's the part I couldn't hear well.
Yeah.
I asked, and I've been to several meetings throughout the state, and basically what it comes down to is the people who are here and the people who come to visit. A family certainly that has 2 or 3 teenagers is going to have a lot more traffic than we do every single day. The traffic that we have is going to be on the occasion. That would be the same as any other neighbor in the neighborhood. Anybody that has a birthday party, a welcome home party, a missionary leaving or going, or someone having some kind of get-together, they'll see people there for that get-together, and then they won't. Then it'll be gone. So we would ask for that same kind of consideration. We've asked several times when I've gone to cities for them to make a reasonable accommodation in the fact that we care for people who are there that are elderly, that are covered by this idea that they are disabled and they have no other place to go, and we care for them. We'll do the very best we can to make sure impact is very low on the neighbors. But in most of my cases, in most of the cities I would go to, this very same, and it was in both Loa and Layton where we're presently doing this, it was a 4-to-1 ratio. And so that meant, and in both of those cases, it's not just 13 beds that we're having. We went, because we had plenty of land, to what the state would allow us to have for a small facility, which is 16. In this case, we're going to 13. But even a more stringent one, if it was 3-to-1, we'd have enough room. And so we ask for that reasonable accommodation and thought process as you go through this. It's not much different than any other neighbor that would be there at any other time with any other activities that go on for their families and things that happen for them. I'm awful glad that the couple behind us, the young lady and young man that was here, spoke that they enjoy the home, that they like it there because they're more than welcome. I've seen them there before, and they're wonderful people, and we would want to make sure we don't infringe on them. Any questions before I sit down?
Oh.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and make a motion then to close the public hearing. Have a second?
Second that.
Have a second on that? At this time, the public hearing for the Beehive Home is closed. Is there any further discussion from the commission for the Beehive Home?
Just doing a quick research here online. Provo City would require 4.3 stalls. Springville City would require 8. So we're somewhere right in the middle for this particular facility. I was trying to do pacing, but I'm not quick enough.
When we went on our field trip this afternoon to look at this and actually get a visual on it, I feel like this long RV pad here, if it was designated to the employees, you could easily get 3 vehicles there. If the 2 employees parked up near the front, I mean, there was some dog kennels and stuff here, and that would probably have to go to get that done. But if that was designated just for the employees, you still have 1 stall here for a visitor, and then it would be tight, but you could get probably 4 on that double pad there in a compact car. I personally felt like you could, but even if you couldn't, that puts 3 across here.
You can do 3, I think practice.
What's the dimension, Corey? I can't read it, so.
I mean, even if you double stack them onto the cement, that's still going to be better on the street than in front of other people's yards.
35,
35 and a half, and that's
That's with a 4-foot walk.
goes to the wall.
People at the street.
Yeah, 35 feet, you're right. So.
I don't know, I felt like 2 could sit there. Now, it may hang over that sidewalk a bit, Dave.
Yeah,
So, right there,
So you're in tandem.
what's that?
Tangent.
Yeah, in tandem, you could potentially get 4 small cars there. You could get 2 big trucks,
That's,
like mine.
that's
But-
pretty tight, though. I mean, 35.
Yeah.
A normal parking stall is 9 feet wide, and you hate those, parking
Yeah.
in those.
Yeah.
So,
But even with some communication with your visitors and saying, we've got a parking problem here, the visitors, could we double park here when you come and visit your families? I guess my point is, they're only gaining 2 beds here, and they're really improving their building and making a very nice situation for their occupants by having individual bathrooms and being a good neighbor. I don't know, I personally don't have a problem with it. I realize it doesn't follow the letter of the law, and so maybe I look at things a little bit differently that way. But, you know, church functions every Sunday, you can walk a block and a half to get to church on some buildings and some events. So I think, Brad, you mentioned the point of maybe 95% of the time, it's a non-issue, and 5% of the time it is an issue. So that's how I feel about it, Commissioner.
Basin City would be 4.6.
Total? With the employees?
Is what they would require, yeah. Yeah, every city's a little different. Provo is 1 parking spot for every 3 beds, regardless of employees. Springville is 1 for every 2 beds, with 1 plus it for each employee. And Payson is 1 for 5 plus 1 for each employee. So.
Fast researcher.
Done it before. Just gotta know where to look. So. .3.
Oh, they're decimals, I think.
Brad? Got a question from the audience?
The majority of the parking on the street is the staff. So if we designate that part, I don't think there would be parking issues. I think we'll have to fix that up a little bit, make it easier to get in and out of there.
Well, even if they have to play musical chairs and let 1 person out, 1 person in.
We would have to do that. But I think that would solve the parking issue. Because it's the staff that parks on the street.
Put those garbage cans up at the far end and even fill that in with concrete.
Yeah. And one of the neighbors' complaints is that patch of dirt right there, because it just grows weeds. So we could cement it clean it fence.
I'm guessing that's an easy fix, isn't it? Kind of reading your body language over there.
We want to accommodate, we'll accommodate as needed.
You could add 10 feet to this side.
What's that?
Concrete. You could add another strip of concrete.
we're cautious of that a little bit, just because one of the things we want to do is make it so it blends in with the surrounding, and if you start adding concrete, then it looks like a commercial building versus a house. And it's not, the aesthetics of it goes south. Although the building next to it probably has more cement pad than yours does. All right, any further discussions? It seems like the team either says we're either gonna postpone it and look at the overall laws and rules of it, or we're going to pass this and knowing that it's already non-conforming.
Ask for a motion, see what happens.
I will entertain a motion.
I'll move that we approve the Beehive Homes conditional use permit with the condition that the employees park along the building on the RV pad.
I'll second that.
Do we want to add something to that in the way of concrete being extended to the fence and fill in that one area? Or no?
And an additional condition that the small gap between the concrete and the fence on the west side be filled in with additional concrete.
To allow for parking.
To allow for, yeah.
Because we can't do it for cosmetic reasons, but we can do it for parking reasons.
Mm-hmm. The back wheel of one other vehicle.
As long as they don't hit my fence.
Right.
And make sure they don't hit the fence on the west side too.
Another problem they have, that 2 lanes where you can park 4 cars, usually they're unloading people, unloading people up.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes in wheelchairs. How is anybody else going to park there?
And on walkers.
Okay, anybody else? We have a motion with we have a second by Commissioner Wilkinson. Did you get that? Okay.
Actually, it was me that seconded.
Second by Commissioner Tanner, excuse me. Thank you.
But there was the suggestion to do the concrete, right?
Added?
Yes.
All right, we'll go ahead and do a roll call vote, and we'll start with Commissioner Wilkinson this time.
Aye.
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 Thank you. We will go to the next item on our agenda tonight, which is the preliminary plat discussion for Canyon Vista Estates. Thanks for coming in tonight. I know there's some hard feelings. I just want to say thank you. And then, is it Mr. McGregor? He's not hearing me. That's all right. Go ahead. Keep going. All right, Mr. Anderson, it's all you.
Stillman annexation was approved into last year, and at that time, we approved preliminary plats for a couple of projects. Canyon Vista Estates was one of those, and you guys might remember, like this is kind of an updated version of what we sent out earlier today. You might remember that Canyon Vista Estates only included kind of this area right here. Since that time, since December, the applicant's been able to get an adjoining property under contract, which is right here. It's this property that has frontage on 2550 East, as well as First South here. In short, staff really believes that having that included with the development is an improvement for a lot of different reasons. So frankly, we're pretty supportive of the project in its current configuration, and have recommended that it be approved as proposed. It's a master plan development, so the applicant has maximized the number of units that they can do on the property from a density perspective, which is just under 2.7, given the zoning that the property will have when the annexation's finalized, which is another thing I want to touch on just briefly. Annexation was approved back in December with a number of conditions of approval, some that we knew would take some time for the applicant to work through. It was a very costly situation that needs to be addressed relative to power in this part of the world, this part of the city. It's really caused by properties that are outside of the city that would come in. with this annexation, as Spanish Fork City Power becomes the service provider in the area, as opposed to, I think it's Strawberry Electric Service that's been doing it for years. And with that conversion, there's some very substantial bills that need to be paid, and that's a substantial condition that the applicants still haven't met with the annexation. They've been told that the window of opportunity to get that addressed is closing. And they understand that they need to get the annexation finalized soon. But relative to approving this plat tonight, it would be subject to the applicant finalizing the annexation, getting the plat recorded. We have not accepted final plat applications for review and won't until the annexation's accepted. But at the same time, we understand that getting this plat approved goes a long ways towards the applicant justifying the expense that's involved with addressing the condition of approval for the annexation. So in my view, it makes sense for the city to work with the applicant by way of saying, yes, we're comfortable with this layout and this design, and we'll approve the preliminary plat. But again, you've got a certain amount of time to get these other conditions met, or you'll be starting from scratch on the annexation and the plats and everything else. So that's kind of where we're at. Again, we view this as an improvement. We appreciate the applicant's effort in getting a little bit bigger project put together.
Thank you. Kind of like the old.
What's that right there?
So in an effort to deal with some block length requirements that we have, we've required that, which is just a pedestrian connection between these two streets. We've also asked the applicant to include this with the understanding that this is a high school. We expect some pedestrian traffic.
Okay.
Just make it easier, hopefully, to encourage people
For pedestrian.
to not,
Okay.
necessarily drive as often as you conceivably could walk. Keys getting people to this intersection where there is at least some kind of traffic control to get kids across the street. So.
Okay. Thanks.
I must say I like the old design better. Had cul-de-sacs, and this just seems a little bit more blocky, square, and it just doesn't seem as.
Here's why we like this design better. And frankly, we wish we would have gotten this right the first time through, but we didn't. The city owns land here. It was given to the city a few years ago by a gal named June Christensen. This is Rocky Mountain Power's big power line that's over there, incidentally. And we have 7 acres here under contract to purchase from June. And unless something dramatic changes between now and November 15th, we'll buy this property in the middle of November, and that will be a park, about a 9-acre park altogether. And we've found that our park space is simply better space. It's more public space, tends to get cared for better. Park spaces are generally safer when you have eyes looking into a park, when uses front onto a park. And the new design does that for us versus having these yards back onto the park.
You show the new design on there?
Rather than to have just a solid wall of fencing there backing up against the park, it'll be completely open.
So that's not a road.
This is a road here, so this
Okay.
will be a road. A small part of that actually will be on the park property.
Okay.
And that's why we like this design better.
So the houses will face the park. Is that
I
what
would
you're
guess
talking
that,
about?
I would guess that some of these will, yeah. And this is a model we're trying to replicate every place now, where we're looking at getting park space designed in the neighborhoods.
This is 150 South down here on the bottom.
I call it 100. Is it 100 or 150?
100 South. No, he took my lot away. I'm not looking for it now. I had my eye on the other one of the other ones.
The other one had the cul-de-sac, but it's still up there.
Yeah.
Paid for you.
Okay.
I think that's the one you're probably thinking of too, with some of those cul-de-sacs, is the Maple Mountain.
There is.
Up there.
So we approved both of those, they're both in the same annexation.
Lots of new stuff out there.
All right, any further discussion from the commission? Anybody have any concerns? Anybody want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion that we recommend approval of the preliminary plat based on the findings outlined in the staff report and the conditions as well.
I'll
We have a
second.
motion by Commissioner Fallon,
I'll second.
a second by Commissioner Tagg. Let's change it up a little bit. Anybody not in favor? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That was a lot better. That was cool. All right. There you go. First for you, what? The first time go? You mean? Oh.
You asked for the nay first, that's good.
All right, good, good. All right, thank you. Let's see here. We have one more. Let's see. Nope, we don't.